All right, welcome back to El Nino Speaks. This is Jose Nino, and I'm rejoined by Lewis this evening. How are you, Lewis?
Good. I'm here to claim my clout chips in the clout casino. I made some predictions at the end of October last year, and basically they came true. So
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah,
yeah.
inform the audience about what you
Yes.
predicted in October.
If you remember, there was a lot of talk back in the end of October of, oh, they're going to send them, we're going to invade Venezuela, we're going to send the Marines, and I was saying, no, no, no. There's not enough manpower down there to actually invade the country. We're going to do, I believe I said like airstrikes or some other shit. I think that was a little, some other weird, vagary. I said maybe they're going to do something with special forces or spin up a rebel faction or something like that. And it seems like they found a weird little thing to do, right? That didn't require a lot of manpower so we didn't get an invasion as well. I think that was a good prediction of mine. I want to take that, and we got some airstrikes, which I predicted, and we got some vagary other stuff, which turned to be kidnapping the president. So I do want to kind of claim some credit for those predictions.
Yeah, it was definitely a temporary view for the special forces bro cinematic universe for sure. They definitely got that, at least in the short term. Anyways, I think this is tangentially related because since then, and then with this discourse about Greenland, we're hearing now all this talk about a return to empire and how the United States needs to become like an empire and just have like total dominion, not just in terms of like hegemonic power, but also start owning other parts of the Western Hemisphere, from Greenland to even some parts of Central and even South America. You've been pretty vocal on Twitter in how you are a major opponent of imperialism and how it's unsustainable in the long term. I just want to give you the floor. Make your case against imperialism.
So I do want to point out two things. I am against both forms of imperialism. There are kind of there's kind of the 1.0 and 2.0 here. There's what we call, there's traditional imperialism that from the age of imperialism, the age of empires, Napoleon and colonizing the New World, Africa, Asia, where you extract things from a people and take territory. That is one thing. There is the second thing, which is like super imperialism, or 2.0, or where the American government operates in a different way with its facilities abroad, where they buy treasury bonds, and we buy goods from them that have a trade deficit. It's a much more complex system. That is not what I'm talking about here, because I don't like either of these systems. I'm not an imperialist of either first or second nature. But the problem is the advocates of this current like new American empire, they're advocating for this like 1.0 style. Like America already has an empire in this new style where these countries are buying treasury bonds from us, subsidize our deficit, like so we can spend more on the new empire. The 2.0 super imperialism is a very sophisticated, complex. There's lots of books on it you can read. I don't want to go into that now. It is more sustainable than 1.0. The reason that Empire 2.0 replaced 1.0 was because it doesn't require things like a massive occupation army, right? Like the Philippines will still be buying American treasury bonds and trading with America and hosting American bases, and it still has like a bandit problem and requires, it still has, there's ongoing fighting in the Philippines periodically, but the Philippine government handles all that. They don't require like American occupation troops to like put the boot on their neck. Now, it requires America to periodically invade a country like Iraq and destroy it, or and do all kinds of other terrible things. And I don't think it's cost effective in the long term. But the individual colonies are sustainable in these 2.0 structure. The problem is these people are advocating return to the 1.0 structure, which is America is literally having puppet regimes and American soldiers and manpower and bases and extracting these countries' wealth, like taking actual oil from the ground and an American company sells it instead of the locals. And this actually doesn't work. Like the reason countries don't do this anymore, this was outcompeted after War II because it wasn't. It was never profitable. Hobson studied imperialism, or economics, just prove this without doubt. But you can't actually pay for the military occupation of a country with extraction industries, because extraction industries are not actually like expensive on a per unit basis. Like oil, people have this idea that like oil is expensive, right? Do you know how much like But like, if you're getting $1 royalty on oil, do you know how many millions of barrels of oil you have to justify like 20,000 soldiers or like 6 fighter jets? Even like the expense of these like occupation of like modern occupation forces is so astronomically high relative to anything you could hope to extract out of any one of these colonies that the math doesn't work. And this is why the colonies all folded. Colony stopped setting up shop. Famously, like the Dutch East Indies after World War II, the Dutch were ready to reoccupy their old colonies when the Japanese pulled out, right? The Americans said, well, if you just make them independent, we'll get you on the Marshall Plan, which was like, loans to rebuild your industry. And it was such a clearly better bet to take a loan and rebuild local industry over, the very questionable results of ruling Indonesia and what you could like hope to extract from that in the near and short and long term, that it was clear and far away the better choice to just abandon those empires. Every country that like the last holdout in the 20th century that tried to do with like modern military technology, with oil locally, with minerals and gold and diamonds and plantations was Portugal. By the time Portugal gave up on their empire in 1975, it had made that country so broke. They were a Western country in NATO with a per capita GDP lower than like East Germany. So East Germany lost World War II, and then didn't get to have capitalism rebuilt, didn't get a Marshall Plan. They actually were paying reparations to the USSR, but they were per capita more wealthy than Portugal, which put all its chips into, we're going to be an empire. We're going to extract from, because extraction is actually not profitable because these things are global commodities. These prices fluctuate. They tend to crash. It's also not as profitable Venezuela's a great example of this, where if oil is below $60, Venezuela is not profitable. Venezuela has to keep the oil flowing because it's more, you can't stop it fully and start it up is very expensive. So they have to keep a certain minimum flow. But this means if you're an occupying power that's trying to pay for occupation, for the last, I think oil's been below 60 for a long time now, for many years. You would be massively in the red if you're an occupying power here. It's just not viable. And the same in Greenland is even worse. Greenland is a colony of Denmark. Denmark has just given up on extracting minerals. Denmark controls it. And they have total consent to the government. Everyone there supports the Denmark government. They cannot find a way to extract minerals from there in any way that's approaching profitability. Just because it's mega harsh conditions, obviously. And also any kind of you just think about it doesn't make sense because any kind of mine, anything you were to mine out of the mountains, you drill through all the ice, you build your mining town. You have to fly everything in and then fly everything out. And minerals are, of course, known to be heavy, right? This is air travel, jet fuel is expensive. The reason that no one's extracting from Greenland is that no one can. It's just the ROI is not there. Maybe maybe in 100 years global warming, maybe in, if we break some kind of new energy barrier. But the reason that this old imperialism model failed is because it's why is bad. It's not profitable. You end up losing money. And to see people say we're going back to it, I feel like it's just a lack of political education and history. So people see decolonization, right? And it is taught. I think it's kind of a way that Americans have taught about the post-World War II era is that, well, Americans have even told all the old powers of Europe, you stop having an empire, and they all stopped, right? Because of American pressure or whatever. But that's not why they stopped. Because some of them didn't stop, like Portugal. It's because they were losing money. It's because and France even tried. A lot of them tried. Decolonization was not an instantaneous process. The French tried to hold on to Indochina. The French tried to hold on to Algeria. Brits actually they half-assed. Oh, maybe we'll hold India. Maybe we won't. They held Hong Kong. Some places got held onto. But you'll notice if you look at Hong Kong, which stayed in the British control, not an extraction colony. It's just a trading post, right? It's just a free trade zone. The kinds of colonies that were profitable in this golden era of colonization were not actually extraction colonies. They were just coaling stations and trading posts, right? It was just a port because ships need to stop somewhere. The reason America had Hawaii wasn't to make money off coconuts, right? If I was to say America's a rich country because we control the coconut trade in Hawaii, you would think you're clearly mentally deficient, right? America's had Hawaii because we could have trade with Asia to stop there to take on coal and take on water. Like it's because we have a cross ocean trade. That's why you have Hawaii. It's not anything you're extracting. Same with Puerto Rico or any number of these Guam. Like America was so successful in this era because we actually didn't do extraction colonies. We avoided it like the plague. And the reason we avoided the plague was because we had just instead of having government-sponsored companies do it, like East India Company, where that company's losses and gains are tied into prestige, so they'll be subsidized by the government. The East India Company was subsidized by the British Navy and Army. So it was clearly out in the red the whole time, but its books could be good because, well, all the costs of maintaining India are on the British Army and Navy. In America, we didn't do that. We just said, well, yeah, you're going to have this plantation and it's going to succeed or fail on its own merits. And they tended to fail, was what it was. But like seeing people advocate this new American empire, they don't understand why extraction empires failed. They think it was because like America told the old European powers just stop doing it, stop being racist, stop being sexist. Like it was some kind of moral crusade. No, it was just dollars and cents. And that irks me to see people. I do feel like it's just what is it a failure of? Is it like American education? Because political science is like advanced. It's like advanced. I don't blame people for not knowing this, but when you tell people this, they tend to get angry at you, I guess. But I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun.
Yeah.
I'm going for a while. You want to put in.
So one thing I'm noticing too, we were talking about this off air, that one of the more bizarre trends in the Trump era has been like the rehabilitation of people like Eric Prince and the broader private military company space. And you're always hearing people say we can still carry out the US's core objectives for these people and even do some imperialism on the side as a treat. How would you respond to those people when they mention that kind of stuff? Because it just seems equally fantastical, if you ask me.
Well, I think you see like the limits of American power and what the American power is achieving, right? Like you can look at the scoreboard, if you will. Like, okay, like in Venezuela, they kidnapped the president. That's meaningful, but it didn't change the state, right? Like the state is still in place. The state's it looks like there's not going to be regime change anytime soon, right? You managed to do you didn't actually change the regime, right? They're like what objective? It's difficult to see what American objective was. Like when you look at what America does in these countries, you have to create a narrative of like American victory. You have to redefine the American objective as what actually happened. So, for instance, in Syria, you have to say, well, the Americans always wanted Jelani to actually be in charge of Syria. They wanted this guy from the beginning. We wanted this guy. And what was the objective of Venezuela? It was just to capture Maduro. Like Maduro was the goal, not any kind of grander scheme of regime change or interests. Like, what was the goal in the Iran-Iraq war or the Israel-Iraq war with America? Well, it was to destroy the Fordow nuclear plant. You could argue that no, you just define your objective as to what happened after, as opposed to totally ignore what the grander implication, the grander desire was, which was to topple these governments, to install pro-America. Like in Syria, they didn't want to have Jelani, the current president, al-Jelani. They wanted to have like a pro-American liberal. Now they have a pro-American hyper-Islamist, right? Okay, like that's not quite the same thing, right? Like you got something out of this, but it's not quite what you wanted, right? They're getting something, they're not getting everything. Or like in Yemen, they defined victory in Yemen as, oh, well, so for instance, the U.S. Navy before the war started had freedom of navigation. Like the Yemenis weren't blockading the American Navy; they were just blockading cargo ships going into Israel. The peace deal that ended the war with Yemen or the conflict with Yemen was you have to allow the American Navy to transit the strait. That's what that was always allowed. They achieved in like Clausewitzian terms, right? If people have studied military history, they know about Clausewitz, who was the first to define war as like a siege in search of political aims. Like what was your objectives in the war? Well, America is just not getting its actual objectives. We are doing things, we're getting in fights, and then we're claiming our objectives were hit. Right? I think that's what the Eric Prince thing is. They say, oh, we can get our Blackwater and special forces and these contractors can get our objectives done, but America is always extremely cagey at defining those objectives, right? So, like, what is Blackwater go? What do you think? Like, what is Blackwater going to be doing in Venezuela? Right? Are they going to be like guarding the oil rigs? Well, how is that going to like? profitable, right? Because if I'm getting $1 a barrel, if America is getting its royalty tax payment of like $1 a barrel, right? Okay, sure. And you're paying a Blackwater guy $250,000 a year. So that's $250,000 a year we've already wiped out from like, okay, any kind of extraction here. Like you can see the economics, like one Blackwater guy being paid like whatever rate to secure this oil rig is already wiping out like the point of having this oil rig. Like they don't address, like that's the problem with special forces and Blackwater and mercenary. They don't actually address the systemic issues of American power, right? They like the entire force of special operations and contractors is not actually separate from American state power and resources. It's not additional. It's just these guys who would be in the CIA or in the big army or in the whatever. Now they're in a different institution, be it Blackwater or JSOC, but they're still going to be they're still limited by the inherent, like you're just reorganizing things, right? Like you're not actually getting, it's like you don't actually gain any new capability by splitting guys off into reorganizing. Like you could, if you didn't have JSOC, right? If these were just in the American army, if it was just, which they are, I mean, Delta Force is part of the American army. It's just like second to JSOC. It wouldn't meaningfully change things. Like it's kind of like a talent. Same with Blackwater. Like Blackwater guys are just veterans, right? You could just, if the American state needed those guys, it could just bring them back and pay them that wage. There's no extra capability you get when you slap contractor on it or JSOC on it that isn't already like inherently there. The reason you do that is for either like money savings, like political re-election stuff. It's not like practical, tactical American empire enhancing. You don't get any stronger by deploying Blackwater instead of the army. And in the inherent problems of deploying the army or Blackwater are both there. Like you don't actually solve the issues of occupation or it's still costly, right? It's just costly in a different way on a different balance sheet, but it's still fundamentally costly. It's still hitting the Pentagon's budget. Like
one thing I've noticed when just studying the development of empires across history for the most part is that they're not only cosmopolitan in nature, but they also start to become multi-confessional, multi-ethnic, and even at times multi-racial. Why is it that these empires, like throughout their like stages, tend to go in that direction where the core population gets diluted and ultimately gets replaced at the end stage?
Well, I think it's just inherent to how governments work, right? Like there's a reason that empires and nation states aren't the same thing. And it's that a empire will necessarily, like, you can't rule over a people and not expect a level of, especially over a period of, hundreds of years, right? Of inter-exchange. Like if you're going to be ruling them and they're going to be living under the same administration, even if they're not citizens, right? So for instance, if there's like American occupation government with Americans, like give them the full empire, right? You have the U.S. Marines and Blackwater. Everybody's like on the ground in Venezuela. They're just like, there's a total Machado puppet government in charge. Like, just give them all their 10 out of 10 what they want. That puppet government is going to, sure, they're not U.S. citizens, but they're going to have elites who are going to be getting educated at Harvard, right? They're going to want to speak English to interface with the Americans around their country, right? There's going to be like planes and boats going back and forth inherently. Some of these will have people on them. Some of them will not. You just can't, like, empires are about integrating states to extract wealth from one state to another state, but they're also about, like, as you're pushing in wealth, you're pushing out organization and culture and people, your own people, right? Your own people go there. They will in-marry to the locals, right? Like, it's impossible to have an empire without like culture. It's almost like to envision an empire where there isn't migration around the empire is like, it's not an empire. It's like, fundamentally, it's not an empire. It's like something else. And the only things that limited it in the past were transportation, right? Because it's a long boat ride from India to London, but you still get millions of Indians all over Africa, all over Southeast Asia, other places. You get Indians in Latin America, even. Like, there's a reason there's subcontinental Indians in Latin America is because the British Empire was one administrative unit, and there's this subjumble around, right? Gandhi, of course, famously was educated in England, but you're going to get these things over time. And as technology improves, it's going to get easier. This effect gets worse, not better, right? So obviously in Rome, it took hundreds of years for this process, right? In the American Empire, it's been nearly instantaneous in terms of the historical time scale, right? From the 1991 Immigration Act to today, it's been 30 years, and we're between a third and a half, and your math of post 1990 immigration. It's the stats are wild, right? So it's just inherent to having a super state. Any kind of super state structure is going to result in this to some degree. Even NATO, which was all between white countries, it did facilitate Americans going to Germany, marrying Germany, coming back, like Americans going to Britain, they intermarry, of course there's exchange coming back and forth. Like, any kind of super state structure above states is going to have this effect. And then with an empire, it just accelerates. It's just a much stronger effect. It's a much closer superstructure. This is not very, I'm not breaking any new. No one, I feel like I'm wasting time. Everyone kind of knows these things, right? Kind of inherently, but it's not, no one's surprised by this.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people tend to have these comic book and just Hollywood interpretations of how history works, and they just don't really think it through. Having this big, illustrious empire, there's a lot of rotten stuff festering underneath like the foundation of it that eventually will consume and just like subsume your polity within a matter of time. But when you can kick that problem off to a future generation,
yeah. Well,
the short-sighted.
Also, a lot of the glory of empire is things like China, Rome, Charlemagne. These are pre-industrial societies, right? The reality of empire in a pre-industrial society is very different than in a pre-industrial society, everyone GDP wise, right? Everyone in a day in a labor, there wasn't too much variation. Pretty much every person and acre of land was equally productive, and therefore, if your empire took more land, that was good. You're getting more total production in your thing. It's going to make you more wealthy, right? Under industrialization, there's clear imbalance here. There's opportunity, right? A person who's working in a factory in the home country, right, is producing so much more wealth than someone who's doing like colonial administration in India, right? Like, does a person in a factory make more wealth in England for the English than the guy who's just like administering a colony? Of course, he's making more. Like, there's as soon as in the modern era, the opportunity costs, also the cost of armies have increased wildly, right? Military technology is wildly more expensive than it used to be. Like, in an industrial era, these things it's so much less sustainable. Like, in Rome, there is an inherent stability for an empire because there's there's so much fewer push and pull factors, moving people around and changing anything, right, on a day-to-day level. Like, the way you live in Rome is not going to change much. The GDP will be stable, right? You can have like these traditions, and you can address problems with these imperial structures. But the world that an industrial person grows up in is very different than what they die in, right? Over a human lifespan, even in the poorest country with like 1% GDP growth per year, that's more than doubling as well of the wealth of a country, right? That's in terms of everything. Like, countries shift so rapidly now. The idea of even like maintaining empire is kind of absurd in just how the ways of lives of people are just so like different. Like, Gandhi, from when he lived till he died, India was such a vastly different place, right? The idea of like an empire is such a structure that requires such expected stability to even exist that like any kind of vast shifting is going to throw it off. It's just not a viable structure. Like this old school empire, you can't. It's hard to like. It's almost worse to take territory. It's clearly bad. Worse. Honest. Like you'd almost want to look at modern countries as like, what do you want to give up? In a lot of ways, like there's opportunity. You could argue that like what is China getting out of Tibet, right? If I want to make China stronger, right? If I'm like, cutting off like the less productive parts of that country is probably a good long-term bet, actually. And like the minerals in those mountains be damned. Like the investment you're putting into this, opportunity cost wise, could be put into a more productive area and get better return. So obviously, there's national reasons why countries don't do that. They don't start cutting off. There's a reason you don't cut off unproductive parts. But in a pure technocratic sense, it's hard to think of a worse thing than like adding more unproductive landmass to your country, right? Or like what you're responsible for.
Taking technological developments into account, especially in the digital era, do you think that as things go more online, that nationalism will just intensify? Or do you think that we could be heading towards an age of centralization of nation states as opposed to like larger like super states?
I don't think that with nationalism, online digital community has actually definitely accelerated like how nationalism works, but also so did just broader trend. Like I don't want to mistake that for kind of getting into like the kind of Fukuyama stuff of like like nationalism is somewhat oppositional as identity, right? I do think that like the trend towards ever globalization inherently created a backlash in resurgent nationalism, and also like things like resurgent Islamism in these societies, right? Like all these are kind of resurgent progressive tendencies, if you will. And you don't want to tie that to like, well, that's because of Facebook, right? Or like Twitter that people are becoming nationalistic. I don't think that's true at all. But it's not zero. But like, people do get exposed to nationalists of whatever flavor they are at younger ages with more developed cognitive points in a way that like it would be weird. You wouldn't probably encounter as many nationalists in real life as you do now, but on the internet, I actually don't really think the digital age or nationalism has much to do with how things are going to shake out. I think these trends were kind of in motion before that, and they're going like. I don't think like the reason Yugoslavia failed was because like Yugoslavia didn't fall apart because of the World Wide Web, right? It would be absurd to say that. I don't think that like Syrian nationalism has reasserted itself in this form because of the internet. I think it was because America and Turkey armed a faction in that war, right? And wanted to win. I don't want to get, I do feel like the internet and digital technology is somewhat overrated in explaining geopolitical trends. Not that it's not there, but I think it's less influential. Now, it is influential in terms of if you want to prevent a foreign power or foreign agent from messing with you, you want to get a big firewall. You want to have the Chinese firewall. The Iranians want to have Starlink jamming in their own intranet. The Russians are having their own. And like, I do think there's aspects of that where countries that are fighting, like the United States, are fighting. Yes, you do want to wall off your own thing, but I don't want to give like the resurgent Turkish nationalism in the last 30 years. I'm not handing that to like AOL or MySpace. No, like that was always there, right? It'd be obscene. It'd be. I think it just makes it easier to view. Like the internet is good because you can look at these trends, but there are countries that don't have nationalism, right? Or don't have resurgent nationalism at all. You're not really seeing like the Basques aren't kicking it off in Spain anymore, right? Like it's just not. It's over. Like the fight's that there's like, in theory, well, like what if shouldn't the internet make Basque nationalism a thing? No, but it didn't, right? Or shouldn't have the IRA kicked it back off in North Ireland? Yeah, they didn't because no need to, right? Like I think trying to put things on the internet is it's a very good explanation if you're trying to argue for regulation of the internet or for walling off your country's internet from the Americans, which I do advocate if you're trying to resist the American empire. But I would never say that it's explanatory.
Nowadays, there's a good amount of talk about just like the collapse of the liberal international order and a return to a more dog-eat-dog world geopolitical environment where annexation and territorial conquest is potentially back on the menu. And you mentioned that wars of conquest and just territorial acquisition don't have the same appeal as before. What makes them much more difficult nowadays, and why should states reconsider such maneuvers?
So generally, there is the cost of occupation, right? So before, in the old days, right, in your say Napoleon, the golden era of territorial expansion, right, in Napoleon and native nationalism, it would be that you are, first of all, when you're expanding, you're oftentimes expanding into a place that is culturally common to you, right? So when Bismarck is unifying the Germans, he's unifying the Germans, right? These are like, it's the way states currently are in the modern era. They've kind of shaken out along these lines. And the kind of 20th century was, a lot of the choice was addressing where these lines didn't quite match and fixing it, right? Like the wars of the, of the 19th century were establishing, these linguistic and cultural lines in Europe, right? And the 20th century was saying, well, these lines are actually wrong in certain places. So we're going to hash that out now, right? Like we those lines of where countries are in the world have been hashed out through now probably 200 years, even in less in Africa and Latin America, but still they've been hashed out, right? Like, let no one tell you there haven't been wars in Latin America between Latin American countries. The whole world definitely forgets a lot of these conflicts, but the borders of countries that exist they are national borders now. And if you are taking parts and pieces of countries, like, so for instance, Russia's whole shtick in Ukraine is that they only want these 4 places. Maybe they want more for real, but that these other places are also more they're ethno-linguistic part of Russia versus Ukraine. And that, like, in the fall of the Soviet Union, when they were administered by the Soviets, it was, with different things in mind. And now it's, now that they're a nation state, they want to take these things. That is like very old school. That's very old school. Obviously that is more workable, but like the idea of we're going to like a situation where, for instance, China is going. So, for instance, Vietnam is an American ally. China doesn't like that. What does China get by taking over and annexing Vietnam? Right? They get to occupy Vietnam at the end, right? Because Vietnam is a different language, a different culture. It's more similar to China than America is, but the costs of occupation are so much higher than they've ever been, and what nationalism is so much more established. You are now fighting your way through. Just to give an example, in 30 years, Ukraine set up, I don't actually, Russian nationalists would disagree with me. I don't think Ukraine intentionally set up Ukrainian identity as oppositional to Russian. I mean, in some more than any identity is oppositional to any other identity, right? They didn't like Russians or whatever. But in 30 years, they have enough of an identity they don't have a very high defection rate outside of that initial civil war in 2014. They have a state. It's cruel. They're but like the state is not in danger of collapsing because of people opting out of the state in Ukraine. Modern states and modern people also, when we look at the golden age of conquering territories, the populations of the territories is so much lower. Like if you look at the populations of any country, any one region or province or city in 1800, and then 1900, and then the year 2000, we're talking 100 times, right? Like these states are more nationalistic, these institutions are more in place, and the actual amount of people you're ruling over is obscenely high, which makes it harder, which increases the cost, which means you need more troops, more everything. The cost of occupation. I mean, look, like, honestly, who am I? Look at the Americans. We've done it twice now, and it's been a clusterfuck. And like, Iraq barely had national identity. Like it was like, but they sure as shit knew they weren't Americans, right? Like, it is what it is. Countries with territorial ambitions, and that's one thing I think is actually raised. America is kind of the only country left with true territorial ambitions. Maybe America and Serbia, maybe Serbia, if we're but I don't actually view China as trying to take over more outside of Taiwan, which is like a thing from like the old redressing those old. That's very old school, right? Those are all ethnic Chinese people. Those are all part of our thing. That's still like very 1.0 conquest and expansion. They're in the metropole, if you will. They're in the home country. Like, that's just part of the home country ruled by other people. I mean, so for instance, to give an example, I think it's possible in 100 years, right, that Germany and Austria will come together in some kind of fashion, right? It's kind of neo-Anschluss, whatever, right? The Austrians join the Reich Germans. Okay, that's a different thing than a war of conquest and expansion, and I think that's possible as America pulls back from the world and is less powerful. Because the only that's keeping Austria out of Germany is like some old myths about Hitler and like NATO rules, right? Because Austria is like a neutral country and all this fun stuff. But in terms of like looking at actual theoretical expansions, I don't think America should or take like North Mexico or all of Mexico or any part of Canada, right? Like these are, it's just not like the juice is not worth the squeeze, and like you're digging yourself in. But that's one thing is I can't even think of other. I guess you can think Russia. I don't think Russia should take over all of Ukraine, right? I think that would be not a good project, right? Especially west of Kiev. Are you crazy? Like maybe Odessa. Question. Like you're getting into Odessa, sure, maybe east of the Dnieper, like maybe the Dnieper and then Odessa, like east of Dnieper. I don't think that whole thing should be controlled by Russia. I think it would become very costly, and they wouldn't get anything out of it. And it also, it in the modern era, it's very underrated. Now, with the 20th century, it's going to get worse. Is that if you are occupying a population, it's so much easier. So it's so expensive to occupy a country, right? This is a great ROI question. It's so massively expensive to occupy a country for very questionable return on investment. Almost usually very negative, very very much in the red. It's so cheap. It's almost free to send weapons to a rebel group, to send advisors. Like the Iranians basically took Iraq from America by sending. They didn't even really send equipment to the Shia militias in Baghdad. They just sent smart guys who knew how to make EFPs, which are a kind of advanced IED that can really blow up a armored vehicle. Like they just sent guys with the knowledge in their heads. They didn't even have to send like a bunch of money and weapons, because Iraq was full of money and weapons, right? Like manpower was cheap and weapons were free. So they just sent guys with big brains. It's the power to hurt somebody else is so much, like the ROI on that is real good. And I think the biggest thing states have to fear is imperial competitors.
Now, let's just talk like hypothetical scenarios, since you just like kind of went there. How viable do you think a kind of prairie Canadian Anschluss with the U.S. would be? Do you think is that on the horizon, like through like a separatist movement? Because I've been seeing some referendums ideas popping up there, and yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's much less violent than it was. I think it's during like a third independence, 1/3 American, 1/3 Canadian. Now, I'm not saying that countries can't expand and change their borders in this new 21st century, but it has to be. I think it would have to be through plebiscites, right? Like where people in a region vote to switch countries or go independent. Like, I don't think you get. I don't think it happened. I don't think it's viable. Is the kind of Anschluss model, right? Where, oh, I've invaded this country or this region. Now let's have an election. I don't think that's like viable, right? The post hoc plebiscite. You can argue that the Anschluss that it was good. It was supposed to happen anyway, but I don't think it's viable that America is, because you can actually see like when America begins to like kind of flex about Greenland or Canada, you see Canadian nationalism increase, right? Canada's not a very nationalistic country. Countries get nationalists when they're attacked, right? The idea of like, oh, we're going to invade this country and then have an election where we win, unless you're rigging that election. And if you rig that election, you're dealing with an insurgency, right? And you better get like 2/3 probably too to switch countries. That's a big deal, right? You probably want some level of agreement there. So no, I don't view the Northern Anschluss as particularly viable. Also, for a number of reasons. Also, it's just that the people there are. I mean, there's the meme, I guess, if it's like, oh, it's just like North Texas kind of a thing. But like Vancouver is a giant Seattle. Like the people there are not Like there's things that like
Vancouver.
like it's like there's some flies in this ointment of this fantasy. I would view it's fun, but it's like Texas receding from the Union stuff. It's not real.
Do you see, because this is an interesting scenario as well, because when Hugo Chavez was alive, he was talking about creating, like, metaphorically speaking, and to a lesser extent, you may have been talking about creating recreating Gran Colombia, the former union of Venezuela, Colombia, parts of Ecuador, and Panama that disintegrated in the mid 1830s. Do you foresee some type of superstructure emerging in Latin America, though, like on its own accord, especially if the U.S. starts getting a bit too belligerent in the area in the foreseeable future?
Yes, but if it would have to be led by Brazil. I don't think any other state has the capacity and wealth and institutional, like these states are, they're all American states, which have the inherent issues there, but they it's hard. You would need to have a leader, right? And it has to be Brazil, because Brazil, like, if Brazil is not part of this, it doesn't make sense, or it becomes either that if there's a new Gran Colombia, right? Because let's say the Cubans and the Panamanians and the Venezuelans and Colombians all have kind of lefty anti-American governments, like which they all kind of currently do at the point. And if they create some kind of union, that would inherently, like, Brazil wouldn't like that, because they would be part of it, right? Like, that would be like, because sure, they can say, oh, we hate the Yankees so much and we love Brazil because you have a leftist social democrat president, but it's going to be weird. Like, it's going to create tension there. I think Brazil has to lead. Also, I think Brazil has to get a nuke. Like, that's if you want a prediction, I think the Brazilians are going to be eyeing a nuclear program pretty soon. They'd be dumb not to. The way that things are going in Latin America, the way their population is going, like, electorally, which is more anti-American, it seems. I think it would be, listen, the realities of what America's been doing for the last 5 years or 15 years are there. If your country doesn't have nukes, you better get nukes fast. And if your country is strong enough and big enough to do it, which Brazil is, like, there's no inherent reason Brazil doesn't have nukes. I think if a nuclear Brazil could definitely lead a kind of Latin American bloc against the Americas, if they had that desire. I don't read that desire in Brazil that much. The thing is, all the Latin American countries want to be independent and sovereign, but they don't want to be, like, militarist. I think Latin America had enough militarism in the 20th century for a long time. Like, I don't see much appetite for a bunch of conflicts. Like, Hugo Chavez, like Chavismo, there was a certain amount of militarism about it with the berets. But you'll notice, you look at those guys, they're not really often wearing, like, military uniforms. They're wearing like what is it, like like factory worker jumpsuit, or like a mechanic's jumpsuits, and they have a beret on. But, like, it's a very, it's not Che Guevara, it's something else, right? Like, I do think that there's an exhaustion with militarism and creating a big military bloc in Latin America. I don't think it's in the cards unless there's, like, NATO. Brazil is nuclear and playing the role of the U.S. and it's going to be like Brazil's project. Everyone else just kind of opts in. Like, that could be possible. But although I will say, I think Brazil now, outside all these things, nuclear Brazil is more viable than people realize. I think in the next 20 years, there's a decent chance there's a decent chance, if you want a kind of a correction, I would say this is a 33% one. Brazil gets a nuke before Iran. I would put 33% chance.
Oh, interesting. What other states do you see on the horizon that could acquire nukes in the next, say, like 20 to 30 years? And why do you think Brazil will get the nukes quicker than Iran?
Because they don't. So one of the things that stops countries from nuclearizing is, like, having pressure on them not to. Brazil is big. It's got the industry. It's got the know-how. Nukes are easy to build right now, relatively. It's also got the need and it's also got a, like, elite political class that wants to, like, secure the state of Brazil and is anti-American, but they have all the technical stuff. They have the size, the strategic depth, right? You can't be blockaded. You can't blockade Brazil. It's an absurd idea, right? You can't invade Brazil either. You can't, like, one city in Brazil could swallow every NATO army could go in at once to Rio de Janeiro, and would you even notice, right? Like,
Yeah.
mega cities, right? So just the strategic depth is off the charts. But they're anti-American. The Americans don't realize that yet. Like the Rand Corporation is not doing Brazil briefings, right? So I think there's a chance where they can, and America will be distracted, right? Where they can realize that, oh God, well, we have all this stuff, all this strategic depth. But what if America just tries to kidnap the president? We can't stop that. What if they bomb this stuff? We can't stop that. What if I think there's a decent, and now other countries that can nuclearize or will nuclearize in the next 20, 30, or will consider it at the very least. Brazil's done like number one. Obviously, Iran's there, but like everyone's talking about that. Mm-hmm. Australia, probably pretty soon, right? Australia, South Korea, Japan, right there. Taiwan won't, because they would, like, of all countries that would just get nuked if they try to nuclearize it. Like, there's a fear that, I try to nuclearize and I get nuked on the process that there. Not actually realistic. Countries just nuclearize. Taiwan is the one exception where if Taiwan says we have a nuke, they're just get it, like, they're in the air. Chinese want to shut the dang fangs, they're in the air, right? I don't think Taiwan will, or even like try to. Maybe the Americans will have like an American one. Things get weird. So he said, yeah, South Korea, Japan, Australia, the Germany, obviously, right? Like the
what German, about Poland?
Poland is in a weird spot where they are like, it depends how they want to play it, right? If they're going, if you read like America pulls back from Europe, Poland will come under the umbrella of Germany probably, right? And they won't need it. And the Polish role in a kind of German-led bloc against the Russians, even the Russians are not being antagonistic. Like, Russians could be just like totally unantagonistic, but inherently there will be a German bloc against the Russians. The Polish role would be to be able to have a large conventional army, probably. And they probably wouldn't want it. They'd be under the German umbrella and wouldn't want to spend, and like the actual expense of the nukes is valid, and so they would have a larger. I think their role in that kind of a future is more conventional. And there are weird outliers like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia's gonna have a nuke. Maybe before Brazil. They might are. It's one of those, like, Saudi Arabia is on those like might already, like, kind of like Iran. Like, they could get one pretty quick if they want to, but they don't. They have like ideological constraints they're under. Other countries, well, the thing is, there's other countries that want them but can't or shouldn't get them. Like South Africa probably wants them at some point, but doesn't have the state capacity, doesn't have the technical know-how. They can't keep their existing nuclear plants running, much less nuclearized weapons-wise. So Egypt probably wants them sometimes, but then doesn't want them other times. And they, once again, don't have the state capacity or the technical know-how to nuclearize. Turkey's up there. Like, these are
yeah, I was going to ask about Turkey. Yeah,
if Turkey is speaking of, I have a friend actually just making a plug for a board game that doesn't yet exist. He is creating a version of Axis and Allies right now with three it's set in the Middle East only, and he's like the Axis and Allies rules of creating income and creating units and moving around a map. And the three factions in his Middle East Axis and Allies modern day, it's set in 2023, are Turkey, the Zionists, and the anti-Zionist, or the resistance. There's three factions. It's a three-faction game. And, Turkey is becoming a faction increasingly in the Middle East. And independent of NATO's wishes, Turkey nuclearizing is very much in the cards. But those are all,
Yeah, fascinating stuff, man. Well, I think this is a good spot to wind things down. Yeah. But before we leave, let the audience know where they could find your latest work and where you're contributing to these days.
Yeah, mostly contribute. You can find me on the right stuff.biz. You can find me on Eviction Notice with Humornat, at Humornat22 on Twitter. I am at Lewis Word Genius on Twitter. I do not have a Substack. I don't have anywhere personally other than my Twitter that you can follow me. Yet I tend to appear in other people's stuff, which is where I have the most fun.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for coming on to the show again. And to the audience, thank you for tuning in. And with that, El Niño has spoken.